Good evening everyone, I'm Dr. Heather Ritchie and I'm a biologist at JAMSTEC. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to learn all about the deep sea from myself, Johanna Weston and Dr. Thomas Linley. First up, I'm going to give you a rundown on what the deep sea is and what kinds of animals, or beasties, you might find there. And we're going to do a wee quiz along the way, so please join along at home and feel free to post your answers in the Zoom chat too. So, when we talk about the deep sea, how deep do you think the deep sea is? Is it as deep as Big Ben is tall, so around 100 metres depth? Is it as deep as the Eiffel Tower, around 300 metres deep? Is it as deep as Mount Fuji, around 4,000 metres deep? Or perhaps it's deeper than Mount Everest, at almost 9,000 metres deep. So, what do you think? Well, for those of you who said deeper than Mount Everest, give yourselves a round of applause, because the ocean is actually almost 11,000 metres deep at its deepest point. Because the ocean is so deep, we like to break it down into sections that we call zones. At the top we have the euphotic zone, and that just means the light zone. The light zone is from the sea surface to around 200 metres deep, and it's called this because the light from the sun can travel through the water to around 200 metres depth. But after 200 metres, it's very difficult for the sunlight to get through, and this is where the deep sea begins. The deep sea is then split into the mesopelagic zone, the bathyal zone, the abyssal zone, and right at the bottom, at the deepest part, we have the hadal zone. Now you might notice that the hadal zone looks a little different from the rest of the deep sea zones, and that's because the hadal zone is made of these V-shaped trenches and they're formed along tectonic plate boundaries. So instead of this nice big continuous space seen in the mesopelagic, bathyal and abyssal zones, the hadal zone is restricted to these geographically isolated trenches. As we travel down through these zones towards the hadal zone, the environment becomes more and more difficult to live in. There's no natural light, there's less and less food around, and the weight of the water above you just becomes heavier and heavier. So, do we think there are any animals that can survive in these kinds of conditions? What do you think lives in the deep sea? Do you think there can't possibly be anything that lives in the deep sea? These conditions are far too horrible for anything to survive. Do you think, well, maybe just a few fish swimming around on their own? Maybe there's loads of animals, more than you could possibly think of. Or maybe you think the only things that can live at the bottom of the sea are these robots from Pacific Rim. Well, what do you think? Well, actually, there are loads of animals that live in the deep sea. The deep sea is filled with all sorts of cool and exciting animals, and this is a short video just showing you some of them. There are too many deep sea animals to tell you about tonight, so I've selected just a couple to show you here. We have the iconic anglerfish with its glowing lure that it uses to catch prey. In the deep sea there are also different kinds of sharks, and there are many other fish species, including the hadal snailfish here, which is the deepest living fish species in the world. But as well as these vertebrates, we also have many other invertebrate species, including these deep sea jellyfishes, and my personal favourite deep sea animal, the amphipod crustaceans. So how deep do you think all these different animals can live? So if we start off with our human here, just as our baseline, how far do you think we can get into the sea with all of our scuba gear? Which zone do you think we can get to? Well, we're actually pretty rubbish at being in the water, so we can only get to the top of the euphotic zone. What about sharks? What zone do you think they can get to? Do you think they can get deeper than humans? Well, they certainly can. We can find sharks at the bottom of the bathyal and at the sort of top of the abyssal zone. What about our snailfish here? So I've already told you that this is the deepest living fish species in the world, but just how deep is that? Well, you can actually find them in the hadal zone. These are the deepest living fish species, and they can be found at just over 8,000 metres deep. That's very impressive. So, what about our anglerfish here? Now we know that they can't be deeper than our snailfish, but how deep do you think they can live? Well, actually these guys are found quite a bit shallower, and they're found more at the top of the bathyal zone. What about our jellyfish here? Do you think they can live deeper because of their squishy body, or do you think that because they're so squishy and soft, they can't live that deep because they would get crushed by the weight of the water? Well, we can actually find them really quite deep into the abyssal zone. There are many different species of jellyfish, and they survive by making sure that their bodies are comprised of water. The more water, the deeper that they live, and this actually helps them to not get crushed. And lastly, what about the amphipod here? What do we reckon? Well, one of the reasons that I love these guys so much is actually because you can find them at every depth, and even at the very, very bottom of our hadal trenches, and that makes them the deepest living animals in the entire world. So, now we know that we can find these amphipods at all depths, but whereabouts in the world do we find them? Well, that's another cool thing. You can find them absolutely everywhere. If you've ever been rock pooling and lifted up a rock and seen a small brown-black sort of animal trying to swim back underneath a rock, then you will have probably seen an amphipod. But are these the same ones that live in the deep sea? Well, not exactly. There are different species depending on the depth that they live at, but there are many, many different species because they've adapted to this environment and they have really exploited everything that they possibly could have to inhabit the entire depth range of the ocean. These are just a couple examples of them, and I think that really they're actually quite pretty. So how do they survive in the harsh environment that is the deep sea? Well, they can use this darkness to their advantage. So even though they can't see for looking for food, they can use this darkness to hide from predators. But when they are looking for food, because they can't use their eyes, they have an incredible sense of smell, and they can smell out food from great distances. And then once they find this food, they can actually distend their bellies so they can consume as much food as possible because they don't know when the next time they might get to feed again. Well, that then begs the question, when they're smelling out this food, what is it? What exactly do they eat? Do you think that they eat the dirt, just the sediment lying at the bottom of the sea? Or do you think they like to smell out and hunt on living animals? Or do you think they wait until the animals have died and then sniff them out to eat them? Or do you think that they eat small bits of plant and animal debris that fall through the water, and this is called marine snow? Well, if you were an amphipod, what do you think you would eat? Well, I'm afraid this one is a bit of a trick question because amphipods actually eat all of these things. Because there's not much food around, they really eat anything they can, and this makes them scavengers. And this is just another way in which they have learned to survive in the difficult conditions of the deep sea. So this is just another short video showing you some of the amphipods, and they're eating some of this baited trap that we've put down. So just some fish that's been put down for bait. And you can see this huge one here just next to the snailfish. And then you can see there's smaller ones covering all the different fish that we've used as bait. And here you can see just how much of the bait is covered by these amphipods, and you can also see some of the fish here have been almost completely consumed down to their bare bones. So obviously amphipods are my favourite deep sea beastie, but what's your favourite deep sea beastie and why? You can let me know in the Zoom chat, and you can also tweet me at Ritchie to let me know. And if I haven't convinced you to love amphipods yet, then Joanna definitely will in the next talk. And if you'd like to see more videos of the deep sea, then please check out the JAMSTEC YouTube channel, which has lots of cool stuff, including this virtual reality tour of what it's like to dive into the deep sea on board a submersible. I hope you all enjoyed the talk, and thank you all so much for joining me.